Cleaning days are usually uneventful for me. I put on some music, get into the rhythm of tidying up, and zone out. But that day was different. That day changed everything. I was dusting the shelves in my bedroom when I noticed something odd. A small, unfamiliar device was tucked behind a figurine on my bookshelf. It wasn't something I recognized, but I assumed it was harmless, maybe a forgotten gadget or a piece of tech Carlos had left behind during one of his visits. As I picked it up, though, a pit formed in my stomach. It was sleek, black, and had a tiny lens. My breath caught in my throat as the realization hit me, this wasn't just some random device. It was a camera. A hidden camera. The world seemed to freeze around me. I stood there staring at the device, my mind racing to make sense of it. How did this get here? Who put it here? Why is it in my bedroom? My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel my hands starting to shake. I live alone, and the thought that someone had been in my apartment without my knowledge made my stomach churn. After what felt like an eternity, I snapped out of my daze and started spiraling. Questions flooded my mind faster than I could process them. Was someone watching me sleep? Watching me change? How long had this been here? Was my entire life under surveillance? My bedroom, my sanctuary, now felt like the most vulnerable place in the world. I had no idea what to do. I grabbed my phone and searched online for advice on what to do if you find a hidden camera. The first suggestion I read was simple but terrifying: leave the house immediately. I didn't need to be told twice. My hands still shaking, I grabbed a few essentials, my phone, wallet, keys, and bolted out the door. I drove straight to the police station. Explaining what I'd found to the officer on duty felt surreal, like something out of a bad Lifetime movie. "There's a hidden camera in my bedroom," I told him, my voice trembling. He asked me a few clarifying questions and then assured me they'd take my complaint seriously. That was a small relief, but it did little to calm my nerves. An officer accompanied me back to my apartment to check for additional cameras or signs of tampering. While they didn't find anything else, knowing someone had been in my space without my permission was enough to make my skin crawl. I couldn't stay there. It didn't matter that the police said everything seemed fine, my apartment no longer felt like home. I called my best friend, Mia, and told her what happened. She was shocked and immediately insisted I come over. "You shouldn't be alone right now," she said, and I was out the door within minutes. The next morning, after a sleepless night at Mia's, I knew I needed to call Carlos. My husband is stationed out of state for his work in the army, and I didn't want to worry him in the middle of the night with a panicked call. Now that the initial shock had passed, I felt more stable, though just barely. I explained everything to him, from finding the camera to filing the police report. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before he finally spoke. "Day, this isn't just creepy, it's dangerous. What if someone's stalking you?" The thought made my blood run cold. Stalking? The idea hadn't even crossed my mind yet. My thoughts spiraled again, and I began asking Carlos a flood of questions. "Do you think it's someone I know? Could they have planted other devices? Should I check my car for trackers?" Carlos tried to reassure me, but I could tell he was just as worried as I was. After a long conversation, Carlos suggested something I wasn't thrilled about: staying with his parents until the situation was resolved. His logic made sense. "You can't stay with Mia forever, and I don't want you going back to the apartment until we know it's safe." I hesitated. Carlos's mom, Anna, and I didn't have the easiest relationship. She wasn't mean, but she could be overly critical and opinionated. There was always this underlying tension between us, like she didn't think I was good enough for her son. Still, I knew Carlos was right. I couldn't impose on Mia forever, and the thought of returning to my apartment gave me chills. Reluctantly, I agreed. Carlos called Anna to explain the situation, and to my surprise, she was supportive. A few hours later, she called me herself. "Day, pack your things and come here. You shouldn't be alone right now." Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it, almost maternal. For the first time in years, I felt like she saw me as family. When I arrived at Anna's house, she greeted me with a warm smile and a hug. She made me tea, helped me settle in, and even gave me her room so I could have the most comfortable bed in the house. For the first time since I'd found the camera, I felt a small sense of safety. But even in Anna's warm house, I couldn't shake the paranoia. Every little noise made me jump, and I started double-checking doors and windows before going to bed. I kept the bathroom door slightly ajar when I showered and left a nightlight on when I slept. The thought of someone invading my privacy lingered in the back of my mind, haunting me. After a few days at Anna's, I was starting to feel slightly more grounded. The police had contacted me to let me know they were making progress in their investigation. They'd managed to retrieve data from the hidden camera, including its manufacturer and the account used to activate it. They promised to follow up as soon as they had more information. I tried to focus on staying calm and settling into a temporary routine at Anna's. She was surprisingly accommodating, going out of her way to make me feel welcome. She cooked meals I liked, checked in on me often, and made sure I had everything I needed. For a moment, I thought that maybe this ordeal was helping us bond in a way we never had before. But beneath the surface, I could feel the tension brewing. Small things started to feel off. Anna would sometimes watch me too closely when I spoke, like she was analyzing my every word. She made subtle comments that felt like digs, like when she'd say, "It's so scary how careless people can be with their privacy these days." I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to her usual personality quirks, but it left me uneasy. A week later, the police called me with a breakthrough. They'd traced the camera's data back to an IP address. The account used to activate the device was linked to a laptop, and that laptop belonged to Marco, Anna's 16-year-old son. The news hit me like a freight train. Marco? Sweet, nerdy Marco, who spent his nights gaming and barely said more than a few words at family gatherings? I couldn't believe it. The officers explained that they would need to question Marco and likely confiscate his laptop for further investigation. I hung up the phone, my mind spinning. I had to tell Anna. But how? How do you tell someone that their son might have been spying on you? That evening, I sat Anna down and explained everything the police had told me. Her reaction was immediate, and furious. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her face flushing with anger. Marco would never do something like that. I tried to stay calm. "Anna, I'm just telling you what the police found. His laptop is connected to the camera. They're going to need to question him." "You should have never called the police in the first place," she spat. "You've blown this way out of proportion, and now you're dragging my son into it." Her words stung. I'd expected her to be upset, but her outright denial and misplaced blame caught me off guard. "Anna, someone put a camera in my bedroom. What was I supposed to do? Pretend it didn't happen?" She didn't respond. She just stormed out of the room, leaving me sitting there, feeling small and alone. The next day, the police came to question Marco. I wasn't there for the interview, but the fallout was immediate. Anna was livid, accusing me of ruining her son's life. She kept saying, "Marco's just a kid. He made a mistake, if he even did this at all." Her refusal to acknowledge the situation only made things worse. A week after the questioning, Marco came home late one evening. I was in the kitchen helping Anna with dinner when I heard the door slam. Marco stomped past us without saying a word, heading straight for his room. Moments later, Anna followed him upstairs. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the argument that ensued was loud and heated. Anna's voice was sharp, demanding answers, while Marco's was defensive and trembling. Then, out of nowhere, I heard Marco shout, "Why don't you just tell her the truth?" Silence followed. Anna came back downstairs a few minutes later, her face pale and drawn. She avoided my eyes as she quietly excused herself to her bedroom. I stood there, confused and anxious, unsure of what had just happened. Later that night, Marco came to me. He knocked softly on the guest room door, his expression a mix of guilt and fear. "Can we talk?" he asked. I nodded, gesturing for him to sit on the edge of the bed. He took a deep breath before speaking. "I need to tell you something. I didn't put that camera in your room." I blinked, confused. "Marco, the police traced it to your laptop." "I know," he interrupted, his voice cracking. "I ordered the camera. But I didn't put it in your apartment. Mom did." Hearing those words made my head spin. What do you mean, your mom did? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She asked me to order it, Marco admitted. She said it was for her office, for security. I didn't think much of it, so I did. But then, he hesitated, his eyes welling up with tears. Then, during your birthday party, I think she must have planted it in your room. I didn't know until after the police got involved. I stared at him, stunned. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? He buried his face in his hands. Because she told me not to. She said if anyone found out, she'd go to jail, but I'd only get a slap on the wrist because I'm a minor. She begged me to stay quiet, and I didn't know what to do. My heart ached as I listened to him. Marco was just a kid, caught in a web of lies and manipulation he didn't understand. I could see the weight of it all crushing him. Marco, why would she do this? Why would she put a camera in my bedroom? I asked, my voice trembling. He shook his head. I don't know. She said she thought you were hiding something. That she wanted to protect Carlos. The room felt like it was spinning. Protect Carlos? From what? I hadn't done anything to warrant this level of distrust, let alone this kind of invasion. The next morning, I told Carlos everything. I explained what Marco had confessed, how Anna had orchestrated everything, and how Marco had been manipulated into taking the fall. At first, Carlos refused to believe it. There's no way, he said, shaking his head. Mom wouldn't do something like this. Carlos, I saw Marco, I said. I saw how broken he was. He's telling the truth. He was quiet for a long time, his face a mixture of disbelief and anguish. Finally, he said, we need to talk to her. That evening, we drove to Anna's house. The tension in the car was unbearable. Carlos gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, while I sat in silence, staring out the window. Neither of us knew how the confrontation would go, but we knew it had to happen. When we arrived at Anna's house, the air felt heavy with anticipation. Carlos parked the car, and for a moment, we just sat there in silence. Are you ready for this? I asked him gently. He exhaled deeply and nodded. No, but we don't have a choice. We walked up to the house and knocked on the door. Anna opened it with her usual warm smile, acting as if nothing was wrong. Carlos, Day. What a surprise. Come in. We stepped inside, and she gestured for us to sit in the living room. Would you like some coffee? Tea, she offered, as if this was just another casual visit. Carlos shook his head. His jaw was tight, and I could see the tension in his posture. Mom, he began, his voice steady but firm, we need to talk. Anna's smile faltered. Of course. What's this about? Carlos didn't waste time. It's about the camera. Marco told us everything. Her expression froze, and for a split second, I saw panic flash across her face. She quickly composed herself and laughed nervously. What are you talking about? Marco told you what? That you asked him to order the camera, Carlos said, his voice growing sharper. That you planted it in Day's bedroom during her birthday party. That you let him take the blame to protect yourself. Anna's face hardened. That's ridiculous. Marco must be confused or making things up. I would never. Mom, stop, Carlos interrupted. I need the truth. Did you do this? The room fell silent. Anna looked at Carlos, then at me, her lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, she exhaled and slumped back in her chair. Fine, she said quietly. Yes, it was me. Carlos stared at her, his face a mixture of disbelief and heartbreak. Why, Mom? Why would you do something like this? Day's never given you a reason not to trust her. Anna avoided his gaze, wringing her hands. I thought something was off, she said, her voice defensive. I thought she was hiding something. I just wanted to make sure you were safe, Carlos. Safe from what? Carlos demanded. She's my wife. You violated her privacy, our privacy, in the worst possible way. How is that protecting me? Anna's voice grew more frantic. I wasn't going to use the footage for anything. I just needed to know. I had this feeling, and I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. You had a feeling? So you decided to spy on me in my own bedroom? Do you even hear how insane that sounds? Anna turned to me, her eyes filled with a mix of guilt and defiance. I didn't mean to hurt you, Day. I just... Stop, I said, cutting her off. You don't get to justify this. You don't get to apologize and pretend this is something we can just move past. You crossed a line, Anna. A line you can't uncross. Carlos stood up, his hands clenched into fists. Mom, I've defended you my entire life. I've trusted you. And now I find out that you did something so invasive, so disgusting. I don't even know who you are anymore. Carlos, please, Anna pleaded. I was just trying to protect you. He shook his head. You didn't protect me. You hurt me. You hurt Day. And you dragged Marco into this, made him lie, and let him take the blame. How could you do that to your own son? Anna's face crumpled, and she started to cry. I made a mistake, okay? I'm sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing. Carlos didn't respond. He grabbed his keys and turned to me. Let's go, he said, his voice cold and distant. As we walked out the door, Anna called after him. Carlos, don't do this. Please. He didn't look back. The drive home was silent. Carlos stared straight ahead, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. When we got back to the apartment, he went straight to the bedroom and closed the door. I didn't follow him. I knew he needed time to process everything. That night, he finally came out and sat next to me on the couch. I don't know how to move forward from this, he said quietly. She's my mom, but what she did. I can't forgive her. Not yet. I nodded. You don't have to decide anything right now. Take the time you need. The next few days were difficult. Carlos avoided Anna's calls, and when he did finally listen to one of her voicemails, he broke down. She's begging me to forgive her, he said. But I can't. Not yet. In the midst of all this, Marco moved in with us. Anna had kicked him out after the confrontation, blaming him for ruining everything. The poor kid was devastated. He showed up at our door with a duffel bag and tear-streaked cheeks, looking like he'd aged years in just a few days. Carlos didn't hesitate. You're staying here as long as you need to, he told Marco. We've got your back. Over the next few weeks, Marco began to settle in. He was quiet and withdrawn at first, clearly still grappling with guilt and shame. But slowly, he started to open up. We had long conversations about what had happened, and I assured him over and over that none of this was his fault. Marco, you were put in an impossible situation, I told him one night. What your mom did wasn't your responsibility. He nodded but didn't say anything. I knew it would take time for him to truly believe it. Amid all of this, Carlos was preparing for his deployment overseas. The timing couldn't have been worse, but we both knew it wasn't something he could change. Before he left, we had one final conversation about Anna. I don't know if I'll ever forgive her, he admitted. But I don't want her to have power over us anymore. We need to move forward, for us, for Marco. I agreed. We'll take it one day at a time. The day Carlos left was emotional. Marco and I stood in the airport, waving as he disappeared through security. We've got this, I told Marco as we drove home. We're a team now. Life hasn't been easy since then, but we're finding a new normal. Marco has started therapy to process everything he's been through, and I've been focusing on rebuilding my sense of safety and trust. Anna still tries to contact Carlos, but he's keeping his distance. As for me, I've decided to block her completely. I can't let her back into my life, not after what she did. Some lines, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. Through all of this, I've learned how resilient we are as a family. We've been through hell, but we're still standing. It's not perfect, and it's not easy, but we're taking it one day at a time. Thank you for watching the video. Subscribe and turn on notifications to be the first to have radish and real stories with you. Have a great day.